Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. I would like to present our keynote speaker, Ms. Phylicia H. Hill. She's a civil rights attorney based in Washington, D.C., and currently serves as the counsel with the Economic Justice Project for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Her work focuses on challenging systematic discrimination in employment and minimizing barriers to community reintegration for African Americans and other minorities with criminal histories. She's also responsible for addressing collateral consequences in employment through Records Assistance Program, which provides pro bono legal assistance to seal, expunge, or correct criminal records. She also engages in amicus advocacy, which before federal courts, particularly the United States Supreme Court, on critical issues such as defending DACA, Title VII protections, and LGBTQ employees. Before joining the Lawyers Committee, Ms. Hill was a senior trial attorney for and a Gideon's Promise Fellow at the Office of the Public Defender in Montgomery, Alabama. And she represents indigent criminal defendants through the various stages of criminal litigation. She's a graduate of the George Washington Law School, earned her Master's of Community Planning and focusing on economic development from Auburn University. And prior to that, she attending to graduate school, she taught elementary at Clarksdale, Mississippi through Teach Up for America. She's a summa cum laude graduate of Florida Agricultural Mechanical University. So can we say Rattler Strike? Where she earned her bachelor's of arts degrees in English literature and political science. And also, she is a very proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I would like to present you our keynote speaker this afternoon, Ms. Phylicia H. Hill.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much to the Tau Delta Zeta chapter of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. I want to especially thank Darkeisha Moten for her leadership in putting together this very inspiring event. I am so honored to be here with you all today. I'm going to be honest with you that this has been a very difficult week, really month and year. And if I'm being really reflective, there has been a 400-year weight on my chest for as long as I can remember. And thinking of something inspiring to say to this audience on this day after this week has been challenging. And so in preparation for today, I began reflecting on what to say to all of you. And I flipped through some of my favorite books and speeches and poems and essays, just hoping to find something, really anything that would ignite a spark in me and help me to motivate all of you. To put it mildly, these are really hard times and they feel more difficult than usual. I don't know about you, but for me, there is this overwhelming sense of dread and fear whenever I turn on the news or log on to social media. And it's getting harder and harder every single day to want to continue to fight for racial justice, because it just feels like every time that there's a semblance of forward progress, there is an increasingly more tragic backstep. And as I was thinking about how to even motivate myself to continue to fight for justice and move the work that I do forward, a quote that I have loved for years and once saw on a monument in downtown Montgomery, Alabama, where I grew up, came to my mind. And it says, "We will fight until justice flows like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." It's actually based on a scripture from the book of Amos, but Martin Luther King Jr. repeatedly wove this message into his speeches, including a speech that he gave in a church in downtown Montgomery during some of the first nights of the Montgomery bus boycott. And that speech and that quote in particular have become a driving force for me and the work that I do on a daily basis. I often go back and listen to that full speech. And so that's what I did before today. And as I revisited the speech, I did a little bit of research and I came across a very interesting archive article about how Dr. King prepared for that particular speech. A little bit of background, Dr. King gave that speech to nearly 5,000 people, both inside and outside of a church downtown called Holt Street Baptist Church in Montgomery on December 5th, 1955, just 4 days after Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to relinquish her seat on a Montgomery city bus. That arrest led to the first major civil rights campaign in the Deep South in over half a century. In that particular speech, Dr. King urges the audience, which has just voted to boycott the entire bus system, to continue that campaign until they achieved their ultimate goal of ending the humiliation and intimidation of Black citizens in Montgomery. I was struck by the care that Dr. King gave that speech, given the tension and the circumstances of Alabama in December of 1955. In another article I found, in an interview, Dr. King recalled that when he was working on that speech, he knew that, quote, many of the Negro people were victims of bitterness that could easily rise to flood proportions. What could I say to keep them courageous and prepared for positive action and yet devoid of hate and resentment? After reading that quote, I started reflecting on what it means to stay courageous and prepared without being filled with hate and resentment in times of difficulty and peril, like when yet another Black child is slain by police, or when states pass legislation to restrict access to the ballot in ways intended to specifically harm communities of color. Spoiler alert, I don't have all of the answers, but I do have a few lessons that I have learned about peaceful preparation under turmoil as a civil rights attorney. The most important thing that I've learned in this work is that you have to bring your most authentic self into every space you enter and occupy that space fully. I know it sounds really cheesy, but you have to be yourself. There are like a million different possibilities for what you can do with your time and your talents, but you have to find that thing within yourself that no matter what, you can call your own. Your true work on earth is what you've been called to do, and it is your offering. Your fullest and highest expression comes when you do what you love and you have a passion and a spark for it. When your personality comes to serve the energy of your soul, that is authentic empowerment. Let me say that again. When you can take your personality, and we all have one, some are bigger than others, and use it to serve that which is deeper, stronger, higher, wider than what you could ever imagine. When you align the energy of your personality with your soul, no one can touch you. You have to find your intention, your purpose, your reason. Think about this. There are like, millions of bakers in the world, right? Some sell cakes and some sell creativity. Some sell cookies and others sell flavor. Some sell cupcakes and others sell celebration. What you bring to the world will be unique. But you can't let what sets you apart and what makes you different keep you from showing up authentically. No experience is wasted. Every mistake and every victory is critical to preparing you to occupy every space you enter. I often joke with my family and friends that I am from everywhere and nowhere and have lived about 1,000 lives. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So I was born in a car in front of the hospital in Belgium. Both of my parents were in the military at the time, and my mom didn't quite time her afternoon errands right and drove 40 miles in each direction to pick up my older siblings from school while she was in labor. The 80s were a crazy time, you know. If you know, you know. And after growing up in 5 different places in 2 different countries before high school, I went into my awkward high school years at an all-Black Catholic high school in Montgomery, Alabama, as the new girl from Nebraska. And needless to say, it made being a teenager even more difficult than it needed to be. And on top of that, unlike these spectacular award winners today, I had no earthly idea what I wanted to do with my life. There was the phase where I wanted to be a doctor, and then there were the years I wanted to be an architect, and then I wanted to be a teacher before ultimately being inspired by my oldest sister's obsession with law and order when I decided that I wanted to be an attorney. I had no idea what that actually meant or how much work it took to become one. All I knew was that I needed to go to college, and I ultimately made one of the best decisions of my life and attended Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. But I still had no idea how to get where I wanted to be, or more importantly, where I even wanted to be. So I majored in what other people told me I needed to in order to get into a good law school. I joined the clubs that other people told me would look good on an application, and I did the internships that other people told me would set me apart from everyone else. Then midway through my junior year, I decided to spend half of my senior year in Africa, and then I missed the LSATs, which are an admission test that you have to take in order to apply to law school. So I applied for Teach for America instead and moved to rural Mississippi to teach 5th grade. And then I missed the LSATs again and decided to get a master's degree. And while I was fortunate to have a supportive family and friends, there were questions about when I would actually go to law school and actually start working a real job and actually grow up and stop being a lifelong college student were not lost on me. And by the time I actually applied to law school and got accepted, I was 25 and had no idea what I would even do with a law degree. But I figured I had run out of time and excuses and options, so I had to go. I always knew that I wanted to help people, but I had no idea what that meant or what that even looked like. And when I got to law school, everyone had it together, or at least that's what it looked like to me. People knew what they wanted to do and where they wanted to work, and they were throwing around phrases like mergers and acquisitions and international taxation regulation. And I had no idea what that meant. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I still don't know what that means. So I started telling people that I wanted to be a civil rights litigator because, one, it was different and it sounded cool. And after the first time I said it, literally no one questioned me about what it was. So it felt like a safe thing to say. But deep down inside, I still had no idea what I wanted to be or what I was even doing in this space. But all of my classmates were talking about going to law firms or becoming federal prosecutors or going to the Hill. And I started thinking that maybe that's what I needed to do to be considered successful. And I tried really, really, really hard to fit myself into a mold that would allow me to be viewed as successful. But after watching the trial of George Zimmerman for the murder of Trayvon Martin, I finally knew that what I wanted to do with my law degree, and I knew what it meant to help people and what it meant to be a civil rights litigator. So after law school, I moved back home to Alabama and I became a public defender. And I was great at it. Like, some people are really good at something and then other people are like really, really, really good at something. I was really, really, really good at being a public defender. Like so good that I was constantly recruited by the district attorney's office to come work for them. Secretly, I think it was because they got tired of losing trials to me and figured that it was better off if I was on their side, but they have a different version of events. And when I refused, time and time and time again, people were confused because it was more money, there was more prestige, it was a seemingly easier job. And people around me just didn't understand why I couldn't just switch sides and go make more money and be successful. But deep in my heart and my spirit, I wanted to do more and I wanted to help people, particularly Black people. So I had to drown out the voices of other people and lean into what I wanted to do, what I was called to do. And when the opportunity to work at the Lawyers Committee presented itself, I knew that everything I had done, that people had told me not to do or didn't understand, had brought me to a place where I could keep growing and do the work that I was called to do. And so now whenever I enter a room, I bring my military upbringing and my Southern roots. I bring Alabama and FAMU. I bring my students and my clients. I bring Trayvon Martin and Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor, because all of those experiences shape how I see and receive the world as a Black woman in America. The voices of the world will drown out your instinct. They will drown out the voice of God. They will drown out that which is pure and true to you if you can't sit still enough to know for yourself what direction to move. The voices of the world will drown out that still small voice of your intuition. What you do and how you do it will not always make sense to everyone else, and it might not be perfectly linear. But if you are listening to your intuition and using your personality, you will always be in the right places at the right times. And when you're there, strong in your reasons and secure in your calling, you will show up authentically and you will take up space. So you know that you're going to bring your authentic self and you're going to occupy spaces. And so you're sitting there saying, okay, but what spaces should I occupy? The simple answer is everywhere you are. Everyone has a role to play in the fight for racial justice, and frankly, no effort is too small. We all have a platform that we can use to move our communities towards justice. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that not everybody can be famous, but everybody can be great, because greatness is determined by service. You don't have to have 1 million followers on social media or even 1,000 to be great. You don't have to be a lawyer or a politician. You don't have to be in a sorority or a fraternity or go to a prestigious university. You don't have to have a certain title, job, or role. You just have to show up and serve. Register voters, protest injustice, stay informed, have difficult conversations with family and friends, feed the unhoused. All of these things move the ball forward and get us closer to the equity that we've been fighting for over the last 400 years. Rosa Parks was a seamstress. John Lewis was a student. Ruby Bridges was a little girl. Jimmy Lee Jackson was a veteran and a woodcutter. There is no right role or right career or right way to serve. Showing up in your community and meeting the needs of the people who live there is critical. It's also important to make sure that when you are in a space, you always say the names of people who should be in that space but are not, because they don't fit a certain profile. They don't look a certain way. They don't have a certain pedigree, especially women of color, and in particular, Black women. It's important to center the voices and narratives of the people who are not present in spaces but are being discussed. That is your service. Lastly, and I would argue that this is the most important thing to know, that this work is a marathon. It is not a sprint. The fight for racial justice has been going on for centuries, and it is a long way from being over. Protesting is great. Don't get me wrong. Litigation is wonderful. It's what I do. I live for it. I thrive on it. Letter writing campaigns do make a difference and they help. But it is the consistency over time of these things that is critical. It is not enough to show up just one time or twice or 10 times or even 100 times. You have to show up every single day committed to your cause. How you show up will vary from day to day, but you can't give up because your cause has a setback. Remember on that quote, we will fight until justice flows like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. It's a call to action. Water is one of the essential elements, often thought to be gentle, purifying, and cleansing. But water is powerful and corrosive. Over time, it can carve into mountains and shift landscapes. It can put out fires, like the fires of sexism, the fires of homophobia and transphobia. It can put out the fires of xenophobia. It can put out the fires of racism. It can put out the fires of hate. It won't happen overnight. It definitely takes time, but it is possible. And if you give up just because it gets hard or because you don't get the result that you wanted the first time, you won't get anywhere. Thurgood Marshall is one of my favorite jurists, and he had a lot of setbacks as an attorney. We're all very familiar with his work on the landmark case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka. But what's most impressive about that case is that it took decades to bring. There were several cases that he and his team brought before that case. Some of them were successful. Most of them were not. But Marshall didn't give up. He and his team of lawyers kept bringing cases. They kept fighting. They kept challenging what they knew was wrong until finally they got a victory. And then they kept fighting, and they slowly eroded every possible defense for the racist educational policies at that time until there was no other option but to desegregate schools. And then they kept fighting because they knew that no matter the defeat or the victory, that the battle persists. And as we have seen, just because we win on one front doesn't mean that the fight for racial equity and social justice is over. So I want to leave you with this. Remember to show up. Bring your authentic self into every space you enter. Create spaces for other people, especially women of color, and in particular, Black women. Say the names of the people who aren't in the room but should be when there are important discussions happening. But most importantly, fight. And don't stop fighting until justice flows like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you so much for your time.